One thing I've been in my life more than once is homeless. So yeah, and it seems like nowadays more than ever, more people are on the brink of becoming homeless. I feel like a lot of people don't think that they could end up in that position. I ended up in that position quite by accident because I thought I had a friend who had invited me to come live in New Orleans, just couple of friends together helping each other out. But after we got to New Orleans and I moved there with my stuff, she snapped and threatened to cut my head off. Now, how could I continue to live with somebody who threatened to cut my head off? So I knew I had to leave. I heard very loud in my head the words, "Get out." I packed my stuff and left. I wasn't going to try and stay and live with her. You don't come back from "I'll cut your head off." You don't come back from that. It's one of those unforgivable things. And people still wonder, how folks end up homeless. And I think a lot of it has to do with, even though you got family members and they well off, it ain't like everybody in your family is also homeless. Although I have seen whole families be homeless and for a long period of time, from what I understood. But you can't count on family members that help pay your rent so that you don't be homeless every month. They're not going to do it. You're lucky if you got a family home that's shared, and everybody, if people are down and out and they need a place to crash for a while, they have some place to go. You're lucky if you have that. But when I was living in the homeless shelter, especially in Seattle, I met, and there's a lot of the thing about homeless shelter, there's a lot of older women. A lot of older women. When I say older women, I mean people in their 70s and older. And you hear them talking about their daughters. You hear them talking about their sons. And in my mind, I'm thinking, if you got a son and you got a daughter, why are you in this homeless shelter? That's what be going through my head. But just like somebody may say about me, well, how come you are not living with your family? Because you don't want to, you're too ashamed to say, hey, I don't have a place to stay. And when everything went sideways, I wasn't paying rent in the United States. So I wasn't locked into no lease. I wasn't committed to no employer. I didn't have to do things I didn't want to do to keep a job. So I don't feel, and I never have been like bound to stay in any one place. And certainly there's nobody that I know of who can't live without me. So I get to do what I want to do. And as long as I'm not hurting anybody and this is survival tactics, then I'll do it. So being homeless was an option. That first time I was leaving Honolulu. No, the first time was the "I'll cut your head off" situation. So that helped prepare me for the long, extended homeless period in Seattle, which I was for 8 months. And that was because when I left Honolulu, I didn't want to go back to Georgia. And the ticket to Seattle just happened to be the cheapest ticket leaving Honolulu after I had done all the research. So I said, okay, Seattle it is. And I had heard about Seattle, you know, some years ago, and saying how liberal the city was. And at that time, they were known as uber progressive. And I have to agree that they were in the way that they helped low income people try to attain affordable housing. Because one of the things that they worked on while you was in the house shelter was they worked on getting you affordable housing so you didn't have to stay there. So they believed in helping you get a job by supplying you with a license to handle food, alcohol, and cannabis. And with those three licenses, you got to work the big games at all of the major stadiums and major events in Seattle, which kept you with income because they understood to be housed, you must be employed. But living in a room with anywhere from 25 to 35, 40 other females, it was crazy. I don't know what homeless shelters are like nowadays. Do they still have them? So many people living in their cars. So many people living in tents. And now that homelessness has basically been criminalized, what are people supposed to do? So hopefully you have some family members or some friends don't mind you bunking with them to help you out. But a lot of people have very few people they can call friends, especially when it gets down to something like homelessness. And if you're homeless, if you see homelessness on the horizon, you better start to pare down now. Unless you want to spend money. I imagine all storage units must be filled to capacity. Because if people are homeless, you can't be carrying everything. You can't be carrying everything with you if you're not sure where you will be living. Being homeless is stressful enough. But having lots of possessions that you feel like you can't live without, that makes it worse. Because you all the time worrying about losing it. You all the time worrying about somebody stealing it. One thing that was available to me when I was homeless in Seattle, there was a storage place that I could go to that was specifically for homeless people. But in order to have a free rental space, and it was something big enough where you could put in suitcases and you could put in a lot of personal stuff. What the payback, the way you paid it, the way you paid for that was you had to devote time to running the storage unit. And the storage unit is only open from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. every day, 7 days, but that's it. And then every so often, they would have a meeting, and you had to be at that meeting. They, again, very strict, no wiggle room. If a rule was in place, that's what you had to do. So it was another stress of being homeless. And sometimes it was like they was taking advantage of homeless people. People was using you know, the crisis of homelessness to make money. And they used to talk about how the money wasn't going towards what it should have been going towards because more people that was in homeless shelters should have been getting housing. And it was just, again, it was a racket. So I shudder to think what it's like in 2024 to be in the homeless shelter if you can get into one. Since it's against the law, it's a US law, it's against the law to be homeless. That is insane. But homelessness is not a joke, and you don't know. You don't know what might happen. You can't say, but I'll never, I would never, I could never. I know people are complacent, people are comfortable beyond their wildest imagination, and they couldn't imagine having none of these creature comforts taken away from them. sleeping in a room with 40 other women and some of them snoring like bears. I never heard such a thing in my life. Oh, they used to make a racket. It was a racket. But like I said, that first homelessness in Seattle in New Orleans, that's what prepared me for the longer version when I got to Seattle. And it was stressful in Seattle. I used to feel some high anxiety. I used to feel trapped. I felt like I was imprisoned. But I knew I wasn't going to be there long. But 8 months was way too long. So I don't know who's going through homelessness. If you're in a homeless shelter, consider yourself lucky because at least you're not out on the street. Lots of women talk about being abused and stuff. I was never assaulted, but there were times when it was really, really scary. So I'm not going to keep on going on and on about homelessness, but yes, a serious thing, and it can be very traumatic. You know, you feel like the one of the rejects of society when you're that way. Sometimes it's like it's your only option. And some people may not even take it as an option. They may say, no, that's not an option, but you'd be surprised what you do. And in the US, it doesn't, right now, it just doesn't look good. And I know they're not talking about it on mainstream media, but you've heard the talk about, and most people don't have enough. They don't have enough money saved up for $100, a $400 emergency. Food is expensive, and ain't nobody talking about that. But okay, don't let me get off on a tangent. So I'm going to end this segment of my talk on homelessness. It won't be my last because I'm sure a homeless story will come up, and then I'll just relate it back to um my homeless experience. Thanks for joining me.